WWF! The rattlesnake is back! Austin is going to lead us into Invasion! And my God, I like our chances better now!
Hello again, wrestling fans, and welcome to another edition of the Good Friends, Better Enemies podcast. My name is Jay, and I'm joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Tyrone. And Tyrone, my friend, it is here. The episode we have been wanting to do since the start of our podcast. The episode that we've been grappling and, no pun intended, wrestling with to figure out how to address this topic. It is Invasion, and I am psyched.
Yeah, I mean, once again, we didn't really know what the hell we were going to do. We kind of figured out a format of which we were going to handle this. And just to let everyone know, this is not our traditional rebooking of an event. We are blatantly stealing the gimmick of the Counted Out 7 boys and doing top 7 matches we think should have happened in that era. Jay and I are each going to give 7. We might even throw some honorable mentions in there. Might have to show Tyler and Mike how it's really done by the end of this, right, bud?
100%. I can't wait to discuss this topic. We've been, again, chomping at the bit to get here. It's going to be so much fun to go back and relive this era and how you and I both kind of think it should have been done, how it should have been booked, and things of that nature, you know, in and around the constructs of each match. So I'm super psyched. And but before we get into that particular piece of business, I believe that you have some interesting news of the week that you'd like to touch on.
Well, I mean, a lot of things happened this past week. Most notably, the WWE is back in front of fans. We saw it last week with SmackDown was kicking all off. Then Money in the Bank, Raw, SmackDown, like we've seen it a few times now. The universe, as they are called, was electric. They were so pumped to be there. I don't think there was anybody that didn't get some form of reaction, whether it be good or negative. Like, you could make the argument maybe a Bobby Lashley, but he just dominated Kofi Kingston so badly that the crowd had to hate him by the end of it. It was perfectly done, in my opinion. You and I have talked about this. We're both not really big fans of the current product, but I got to say the last week and a bit of WWE television and events have actually been quite solid.
I agree 100%. I think that the addition of the fans back in the seats has made a big, big difference. And I also think that something that we alluded to before in previous podcasts, even up to, you know, going into this year from last year, that I've always sort of had the thinking that the WWE in some way has been in some semblance of a holding pattern. They haven't been doing a lot in terms of pulling out all the stops. They were waiting for this opportunity, waiting for this moment. And of course, that's evidenced by the return of John Cena, the return of Goldberg, return of some other notable stars, Finn Balor coming back to the main roster. Of course, you have some NXT call-ups and things of that nature. So I feel as though they are really trying to throw everything against the wall and see if they can't, you know, boost their ratings. And I'm sure that for any fan that might have become a lapsed fan over the pandemic era, I feel as though people were very interested to tune in and see what was happening. I know for myself, I was very interested to see what they would do once we had fans back in the seats. And I do agree with you. I think I'm much more invested in the product than I have been in the recent months and even last couple of years. So we'll see where we go from here. But I know I am getting excited for SummerSlam. I think it's going to be a great event. And I think in many ways, I'm more excited for SummerSlam this year than I was for WrestleMania.
Well, that's understandable. I mean, you've got bigger names coming back. I know, and this, I swear to God, this is not me taking a shot at you in any way, shape, or form. I know you're a big fan of the part-timers coming back for these big events. I'm not necessarily, but goddamn, John Cena. Never thought I'd be so happy to see a man dressing like he's a 14-year-old kid still, coming out, doing what he does on the mic, calling out Roman Reigns right off the bat. We knew it was going to happen. I am actually looking forward to this match. I think the storytelling up to it's going to be great. I think the promos between Cena, Heyman, and Reigns are going to be fantastic. But that's not the one I want to talk about right now. What I want to talk about is why the fuck do they have to bring Goldberg back again? I get it. He signed to a deal where he gets, 2 matches a year, I think is what he's booked for. But wouldn't you rather see Lesnar versus Lashley versus Goldberg versus Lashley? I don't want to see this match in the slightest. And judging by the fans' reaction to his return on Monday, you guys can challenge me, but I challenge you to this. When his music hit, there was a large pop. But as soon as his music was over, the pop and the Goldberg chants were done. I honestly think that they were piped in because they didn't know what kind of reaction he was going to get. And it was not the biggest positive one ever once the music ended. I don't know if you saw it or not, Jay, but that's what I think about it.
I did see it. I'm kind of in the same boat with you, but I feel as though they wanted to get one more date out of him this year. I think it makes sense to do it at SummerSlam. I think if you're going to do Lashley and Lesnar, I kind of see the long-term play here of not giving it off right off the top of the return of fans into the stands. It makes sense to me to hold off on that and build that up, maybe to a Royal Rumble, maybe even to a WrestleMania. Maybe that's what they're going to do with it. I don't know. I think it's going to happen, but I kind of get the idea of not doing it immediately. I don't see Goldberg winning the title, and I have no problem with Goldberg coming back. Actually, I'm fine with him coming back. But to your point, I would kind of prefer to see Goldberg maybe in just a one-on-one match. Somebody comes out and calls out a legend or what have you. I don't necessarily know if I need to see him in a title match again, especially if the idea is that he's putting over some of the younger talent. Now that Lashley's not all that young in terms of some of the other people on the roster, but I was good with him putting over McIntyre at Rumble. I feel like maybe he should have just been in a one-on-one kind of program, sort of similar to what he did with Ziggler a couple of years back at SummerSlam. I don't know if I want to see him in the title picture. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. You know me, I'm not a big fan of Goldberg at all. I never really was. He wasn't my cup of tea, but when he did the program with Ziggler, that was fine to me. It didn't hurt Dolph at all to lose to somebody like a Bill Goldberg. But again, you're not, to a degree, jobbing out your top stars who are going to be there all the time, a la when he beat Kevin Owens for the Universal title. I thought that was dumb. But yeah, that makes more sense to me. The other thing I want to touch on about Money in the Bank is, were you surprised at all with the Big E and the Nikki ASH wins? Or did you see that coming? Looking back on it, it all makes sense, especially what we saw on Monday night. It seems they just want to put Charlotte Flair in all these records and have her beat her dad's title reign, even though they're counting her 2 tag team championship runs in that 14-time champion, which makes no sense to me. Because if you count Rick's title runs, including tag team, US, Intercontinental, he is way up there. But then to have Nikki Cross come out and cash in on Charlotte, I like the fact that they did it. It makes sense from a company standpoint. You can market it. It's really good for the younger fans to see this superhero-esque character coming out, the feel-good moment of her winning. I like it a lot with her having the title. I do not like the fact that they gave Charlotte the belt for 24 hours just so she could add another one to her list.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily surprised with the Big E win. I think that everybody saw the writing on the wall that was coming. And I'm glad that it has happened. I'm very glad as well that he's been broken off from the New Day for it to happen. I think that's the way it should have been done with Kofi back when he had his title run. I mean, you can still have the affiliation. You don't necessarily have to do a breakup angle, but to go off on your own, I think makes more sense. In terms of Nikki Cross, I will say that surprised me that she won. I guess I'm kind of on the fence about it right now. I don't feel like she is necessarily face of the division type material. I think that she has the potential to be high on the card, but I don't think that her title run's going to be very long. And to your point about Charlotte, I'm kind of over Charlotte. I feel like she's now become the superstar that's being pushed super hard, a la Roman Reigns a few years ago type thing. I mean, she's established, she's done a lot, she's a spectacular athlete, she's very well accomplished. But I also feel like let's just cool our jets here a bit. She doesn't need to win all these championships and match her dad's career, goals and aspirations within, 6 or 7, 8 years. Took him 30 plus years to win all those titles. We don't need for her to catch up to him this quickly. Let's just cool our jets. Maybe take her off TV for a bit. I like the idea of her coming and going. I think that she's maybe a little bit overexposed at this point.
So the other thing that I'm not a big fan of is you had Rhea Ripley and you had Bianca Belair both win their respective brands championships at WrestleMania. And they clearly have more faith in Bianca Belair over Rhea Ripley because they are going to make that a very long title reign. I'm assuming she's going to hold it until maybe even when Bayley comes back in 8 months, unless Sasha Banks does it again. Those are the only two real contenders I see on SmackDown right now. Whereas I would have loved to have seen Rhea get a much longer title reign. She could have run through Charlotte Flair. She could have run through Nikki Cross. Trying to think of the other women on the Raw roster. Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler. She could have done all that and build to the Becky Lynch return and have Becky and Rhea go at it, which I think would have been spectacular, instead of potentially seeing another Becky versus Charlotte, which, goddamn, to me, that's like Cena and Orton. I don't need to see it again.
Yeah, and I think that, something that we've talked about before off air, and I believe we touched on it as well on air, is the reaction to certain people when we were back with full capacity crowds. I mean, yes, Becky was super, super over before she, left to for her pregnancy and things of that nature. She was super over when she won the women's triple threat main event at WrestleMania. I'm all for that. I did feel, though, that towards the end of her run, before she went on her maternity leave, that there was some steam coming off that ship. I felt like her momentum had been stalled a bit, maybe not to any fault of her own, might have been due to the pandemic. I'm not sure, but I'm curious to see how over she is when she comes back. I'm sure she'll get a huge pop, but will she reclaim that momentum that she had before she went away? I'm not 100% sure about that.
I fully think she's coming back to a John Cena, Edge, Stone Cold Steve Austin-esque pop. I think it's going to be louder than anything we've heard in a long time. And I know what you mean about, like, towards the end of her run before she had to take time off. Yes, it did seem a little stale. The gimmick might have been not as cool as it was, say, a year ago, 8 months ago. But I think this has honestly been one of the best things for her career. Take the time off, still make little posts on social media here and there, teasing something. But when she comes back, it's going to be Rock coming back to host WrestleMania level. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's how I see it.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. I think the initial pop's going to be huge. I completely agree with that. I'm just saying, I don't know if she is going to be back on the same trajectory that she was before, now that she's been off for a while. I think that, people always love returns and things of that nature. I'm just not 100% convinced that she's going to get back to the same level of being over that she was before she left, because I felt as though her wheels were starting to spin a little bit and she was starting to cool off a tad before the pandemic hit, even before we lost audiences and all that kind of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see. I hope I'm wrong. I think that the WWE definitely needs to have some current roster stars that are over to that level, so that we don't have to rely necessarily on part-timers as much. But I definitely feel like we're in for an interesting ride with some of these returns coming in the next coming weeks and months.
Well, the only other thing I want to touch on about WWE before we move on is I found it kind of interesting that the 3 call-ups that we've had from NXT, Shotzi Blackheart, Tegan Nox, and Toni Storm, all on SmackDown. Do you think we're getting a couple on Raw? I've heard rumors that Mandy Rose has been traded to NXT, is what they're saying, and Aaliyah will be on Raw. But is Aaliyah the only one coming up? Are we going to get I don't even know. Like maybe, I guess Karrion Kross was on Raw, but that was a really weird situation where he lost to Jeff Hardy of all people. I don't know if they were just trying to push the fact that his old theme music is back. That seems to be the main reason behind it. But you have Kross in NXT running through everybody, doing a storyline right now with William Regal and Samoa Joe. Sounds like he's going to headline TakeOver in August with Samoa Joe. Why are you jobbing him out on Monday Night Raw?
I agree 100%. I don't really understand that booking philosophy either. In terms of Jeff Hardy, I think that what they're trying to do is maybe establish him as the single star that he was back in the latter half of the first decade of the 2000s. I'm thinking 2008, 2009. He was really over at that point, won the world title. He was one of the more over acts in the company at that time. And I think that maybe the idea of giving him back his old theme music, making him a standout single star, they're hoping they can recapture that lightning in a bottle and maybe have him come back and be, a real big contributing factor on the roster. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I don't know if Jeff Hardy is in a position right now in his career where he necessarily wants to that position. I also don't know if he can necessarily hold up. I mean, he's been through some real wars in his career, and he's in his 40s now. Not to say that he can't go. I think he can still go at a high level. But if they're expecting Jeff Hardy from 10, 12 years ago, I don't know if we're getting that.
I think Jeff Hardy is kind of the Raw equivalent of Rey Mysterio on SmackDown. Still got a couple of years left in the tank, but you got to be careful with what you do with them. If you want to keep them strong, put them in, like, Rey and Dominic has definitely extended Rey's career for a little while. It's also giving Dominic the rub. I'm not necessarily saying put Jeff in a random tag team with an up-and-comer, but you need to do something with him to kind of maybe put him like an MVP, have him in a mentoring role where he still wrestles. I don't know. I really, truly don't know, but that's all I have for WWE. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, or if I can move on to the next one.
Well, the only thing I'll add is I definitely don't think that is the way to go with Hardy and putting him in another tag team. He's always going to be compared to his brother, the Hardy Boys. They're always going to be compared to whatever tag team that he would be sort of put together with. So I don't think at this time it's the right call to make him a tag team competitor again. Let's see what he does on his own. Let's see if he connects with the younger fan again, selling the armbands and the face paint and all that kind of thing. Let's see if he's able to reconnect and resonate with the younger audience. And then from there, maybe if that doesn't connect the way they want it to, you can go elsewhere with it. But for right now, I think let's just keep him as singles and see what happens.
So something weird happened in the world of professional wrestling last night. And normally we don't touch on a lot of independent, per se, companies, let alone death matches. But would you ever in a million years think that I would be saying that Matt Cardona beat Nick Gage in a death match for the GCW World Heavyweight Championship? Is that a sentence that you ever would have thought that you would have been hearing?
Not at all. But I have to say, I mean, I didn't see the match. I have to say I'm not mad at it. Listen, it's wrestling. We're all wrestling fans. I think we're all sometimes guilty of taking this stuff a little bit too seriously. They've been building this match now for a couple of months. Obviously, it was very hard hitting. I saw the screen grabs of what Cardona looked like after the match. I also saw.
Did you see? Sorry to cut you off, but did you see the video of right after he won where they were just hucking garbage at him?
I was just going to say, yeah, I saw the video of afterwards where they just littered the ring. It was sort of emblematic of what happened to Hulk Hogan and the NWO at Bash of the Beach 96, just being littered with garbage and debris. I just think I think people need to chill out a bit here. It's wrestling. It's a show. It's an enjoyable experience. You're supposed to be entertained by it. So I don't know. I think it's a bit over the top. Some people will say, yeah, it's heat. He got a tremendous amount of heat. That to me wasn't heat. That was just disrespectful to me.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Which this whole thing kind of segues into my next thing. We're going to talk AEW for a second here. It seems that they have made a signing or two. And I don't know about you, Jay, but the fact that I am about to say that Nick Gage may be signed to AEW. We know he's wrestling Chris Jericho, on an AEW event. Whether or not he's been signed, I'd never in a million years thought I would see Nick Gage, the man who on Dark Side of the Ring came across as, I'm sorry to all you deathmatch fans, I'm not the biggest deathmatch fan out there, but Nick Gage came across as the biggest piece of shit I've ever heard talk about wrestling, more so than New Jack, in my opinion. And now he is with arguably the number 2, maybe even soon to be, I mean, this is stretched, number 1 company out there. Why are they risking signing somebody like Nick Gage?
I don't really know. I don't have an answer for you. The only thing I can think is, after that Dark Side thing came out, and he's had a lot of personal problems. We all know that. It's well documented. Maybe they're just trying to throw him a bone and see if he in fact has gotten his life together and he's doing well, he's prospering. Maybe they want to try to give him an opportunity. I don't know. It's certainly not my cup of tea. I think that the Nick Gage episode of Dark Side was probably my least favorite. I just don't have any interest. To me, that's not wrestling. When you're hitting somebody with, light tubes and thumbtacks and barbed wire ropes and all this kind of stuff. I mean, a little bit of that, I don't mind here and there, but that type of wrestling, that's not wrestling. That's just, I don't know. I think that's just shock value for the sake of shock value. I'm not overly interested in it. Him being on the roster, yeah, I guess we'll get some real deep hardcore wrestling, I'm assuming. I don't know that if he has the skills to have a, one-on-one regular wrestling match. Maybe he does. I don't know, but I certainly am not overly excited about this signing whatsoever. It does nothing for me.
Well, I mean, putting him with Jericho will definitely prove if he can hang. Like, Jericho, to me, he's past his prime. I hate to say it, but he definitely is. He looks like your friend's dad who is still somewhat in shape going out there. And especially when he does this Painmaker gimmick, he looks ridiculous. I will forever go out on a limb and say that Painmaker Chris Jericho is one of the worst looks I've ever seen in professional wrestling. But going back to Nick Gage, I don't know, like, you look at somebody like a John Moxley who has such a storied career from CZW, which again is very hardcore-esque wrestling. You look at Eddie Kingston, they took a big chance on him. I'm wondering if they're going to have maybe an Eddie Kingston, Nick Gage, John Moxley alliance where it's all the deathmatch-esque guys kind of teaming up and proving that they can work.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to walk back something I said. I don't mean to say that I don't think that deathmatch wrestling or deathmatch performers aren't talented. I think it takes an incredible amount of skill to be able to, well, maybe skill is the wrong word. Maybe what I'm meaning is you have to have.
I trust me, dude. I know exactly what you mean. I wasn't saying in any way, shape, or form that you don't have respect for what they do. You just don't necessarily respect that type of wrestling, not the performers who are involved.
Well, I just don't think that you can call it wrestling. I think, you can put it in a ring, a wrestling ring, but it's not wrestling to me. I mean, there's no real psychology to me. It's just beating each other mercilessly with weapons. I don't like it. And so if they're going to try to do some sort of a stable where they're going to have those guys in it, sure, I guess. But they need to be careful as well. I mean, they want to do this buffet aspect or a club sandwich aspect to wrestling where you get a little bit of everything for everybody. And I get that, but I don't know. We'll see where they go with it.
No, that's totally. And then, I mean, probably the biggest news story of the week. I don't know if it's 100% confirmed. It's all but confirmed. But my God, ladies and gentlemen, the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, is all elite. And by the sounds of it, CM Punk is also very, very close to signing a deal with AEW. I'm kind of dumbfounded. I truly never thought that Punk would be back in a wrestling ring. I also wasn't sure if Bryan would be going to AEW, re-signing with WWE. I guess it sounds like from what I've read and from what I've heard, again, everything I take with a grain of salt. You never fully know until it happens. I guess Bryan signing with AEW, the big thing was that they were going to allow him to be working with New Japan, which makes sense because they have the working relationship with it. And that's where he really wants to go. Jay, I can't believe that I'm going to see Bryan Danielson in AEW and that we don't have to call him Daniel Bryan anymore. We can finally go back to calling him Bryan Danielson.
Yeah. Interesting signing for sure. I mean, it's a big name. I personally don't feel like it's quite as big of a deal as some people are making it out to be. I think Brian's...
Okay, are you honestly going to argue with me that that you think Christian Cage's signing was a bigger deal than Bryan Danielson?
No, I didn't say that. I just feel that I'm just going to call him Daniel Bryan. I feel that with him, he was at the height of his career.
Why don't we just call him Brian? Because then it satisfies both of us.
Sure, that sounds good. So Brian to me was at the height of his popularity, height of his career in 2014. Obviously, he was injury prone there for a while, and he had to retire. Again, no fault of his own. I feel like the WWE dropped the ball on him in terms of when he came back. Yes, he came back to a lot of pomp and circumstance and fanfare, but over the last, even again, before the pandemic hit, I feel like he was just being marginalized. He has lost a lot of the steam that he had, before he got injured and retired. That's not to say he can't recoup it. I think he's going to be a great addition to the roster. I think he's going to do quite well. The matches obviously would be spectacular. But from my perspective, I feel like it's a big deal, but to me, it's not the big signing. It's not like, if you're going to equate it to the Monday Night Wars, it's not the big, it's not the Scott Hall moment to me. Let's just put it that way.
No, and that's fair. I'm not going to lie. I'm personally more excited to see CM Punk if he shows back up. I think that that's going to be crazy because his promos, I feel like, won't be scripted or really that censored to a degree. I know you're not the biggest Punk fan, but he's one of my faves.
Well, here's what I'll say about Punk. I think that in terms of Punk's, I always assumed that Punk would be back in the wrestling ring at some point. I just figured it was going to happen. I didn't know when, but I always just kind of had it in the back of my mind. It was going to happen. The thing with him is, and the trouble for him is, I think it's impossible for whatever is done to bring him back to live up to the hype of it. I think it's been so hyped for so many years now. I just don't see anything that they do living up to the hype of him coming back. I think that he's going to be a great addition to wherever he goes, as long as he has his head on straight and he's a team player. I really do think that there is a lot of potential for him to make a difference. But again, even if it was WWE, I don't really know where you go with him in terms of trying to capitalize on that, on that huge build, that huge anticipation for him coming back. How do you live up to that hype?
I mean, I don't know. I truly don't know. I guess only time will tell. That's the only way that we can say that. But as we've been babbling for almost half an hour, talking about all things current, I think it's time we go back to the year 2001, Jay, and we give the people what we want to give them. I don't care if it's what they want, it's what we're giving them. Welcome to Jay and Tyrone's top 7 each matches that should have happened from the Invasion era. Now, I want to let everyone know we're not going to do our traditional run down the card. We will talk about a couple of matches that we both agreed were pretty good from the pay-per-view. The original pay-per-view itself happened in Cleveland, Ohio at the Gund Arena. We all know that. And the story started building about 2-ish months prior. I believe it was in late May, early July, or early June when we saw DDP debut as that stupid stalker. We had Booker T come in at the King of the Ring. And that kind of set us where we were going. And at that point, I didn't hate it. I hated the stalker part, but I liked the fact that we were getting DDP and Booker T, 2 of the biggest names from the Invasion. I don't know if you agree or not. Like, at least the first person to agree, or no, actually, the first person to debut, wasn't it Mike Awesome winning the hardcore title? Am I right or wrong there?
I think it was Lance Storm Lance Storm debuted at the Calgary Monday Night Raw back in May of 2001. I'm fairly certain it was Lance Storm.
And again, I mean, you couldn't ask for pretty much a better worker to debut, especially in Calgary. At least we weren't getting Buff Bagwell as our debut. Like, I know we had that fun Monday Night Raw main event that we all remember so fondly of Booker T defending the WCW title against Buff Bagwell, which, Jay, something I actually wanted to talk about. The commentators for that match of Scott Hudson and Arn Anderson. Is that who you would have gone with, or would you have brought Shivani back? The man is speechless. All right, I guess.
I personally. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. Sorry. Yeah, I would have brought Shivani back. I don't know if Shivani was interested in doing it at that point. I really don't. Misstep. A big misstep, I think, doing that main event. I understand why they did it.
Are you saying the match was the misstep, or the commentary team, or everything?
I think the whole presentation was a misstep. I think doing it the way they did it, with trying to change Monday Night Raw into like Monday Nitro, and just changing the ring aprons and changing the graphics on the Titantron, and then having a WCW referee. Arn Anderson's one of the greatest promos in the history of the business, but he's not a commentator. Scott Hudson's a great commentator, but you need to have the right person in terms of color commentary on there. So I don't know if that was necessarily the best idea. And then, of course, Buff Bagwell and Booker T, you have to give them a little bit of a pass, I think. They hadn't worked in the WWE rings as much. They're different rings than the Turner rings were. It's also a different crowd they're working in front of. The crowds from the predominantly southern regions of the WCW that they were traveling at the time, they were accustomed to a different kind of product. We have a predominantly WWE, WWF audience watching a presentation of two wrestlers from a different promotion that maybe some of them aren't as familiar with. I think that the whole presentation was a flop from the start. And had you done it differently, I think maybe something along the lines of a WCW special or something like that. You do a tape, you set up a different kind of entrance stage, set up a different kind of ring, you have a different format, and you do it after a SmackDown taping or something like that. Not dissimilar from what they did in ECW in the beginning with the different stage and all that kind of thing. I think that might have had a more impactful way of educating the audience about the wrestlers, as opposed to just doing something at the tail end of Raw. What do you think?
Okay, so I agree with what you're saying about the format being stupid and just all of a sudden, we put a graphic on the screen, we changed the ring apron, the referee's wearing a white shirt with a red logo. I get what you're saying. But at the same time, you can't tell me that in 2001, if you were a fan of the WWF, unless you were a child, I will give you that you didn't know who at least Booker T was, probably Buff Bagwell as well. But those were two of the bigger names that they had at the time. Had they done Paige and Booker T, I think it would have been different. But so if I were to completely redo that scenario, and I probably would have had the same two guys, but I would have done what WCW did, which is the three-man booth. I would have tried my hardest to get Mike Tenay and Tony Schiavone in there with Scott Hudson. I think that would have done a hell of a lot more. And honestly, I would have brought Michael Buffer in to do the ring announcing to make it feel like that big match feel.
Yeah, no, I like that. That all sounds really good. But before we get too ahead of ourselves in terms of the actual invasion angle and how it was presented, something that you and I have talked about for, I feel like, time immemorial. We've talked about this so many times. Every time we sit down and have a couple of beers and a shot or two of Jameson or Jack Daniels, we end up talking about this some way. The invasion angle itself. So you buy WCW in March of 2001. You know that you have these AOL Time Warner contracts coming due within 12 months or so. Why don't you wait? I've always asked this. I don't understand why they didn't wait. You don't think that Hogan, Hall, Nash, Flair, Steiner, Goldberg, Rey Mysterio, all these guys that have Time Warner contracts coming up due, you think they're just going to retire? You think they're not going to want to come back into the business? Do you not think that these people are going to want to have a conversation about a contract? What is the rush here? Why do we start an invasion angle off with Lance Storm? All the power to Lance Storm, all the credit to him. He's a phenomenal athlete. But I'm sorry to say, in terms of who he was and his star power and gravitas in 2001, that was indicative of the entire invasion angle in the beginning. You start off with somebody like Lance Storm. I guess, you can build to bigger stars, but I just feel like it was a shot of a blank gun at the beginning of the whole thing. When you look at how much talent and established over talent that you had waiting in the wings within 12 to 14 months, why wouldn't you wait?
Okay, so I see what you're saying, but also here's my argument to that. You have all these young, fresh stars. Why not get them incorporated while you can? You know the contracts are going to be up in about a year. Maybe they're thinking long-term booking. Maybe they're thinking, oh, well, we just had WrestleMania 17 where they did that weird one shot where Shane came out and said, I want to give props to my boys and girls from WCW. And you saw in the Skybox, I think you saw Chavo, Lance Storm, Hugh Morris, Stacy Keibler. There were no main event names there, that's for sure, as far as I can remember. Booker T might have been there, but I'm not sure. So it makes sense that if that's the first image you're showing of any WCW wrestlers, to use one or two of them as the debut. Then you think ahead, you're like, all right, we got Mania 18 coming up. Who can we bring in closer to that? Well, these contracts are going to be up, so we're thinking ahead. All right, we'll have Hogan, we'll have Hall, we'll have Nash. Then you even think further along. You look at the night after WrestleMania 19, I believe it was. Yeah, 19, where you had Goldberg debut. So I don't know if it was all planned out. It probably wasn't, knowing them, but that could have been the long-term booking of it. You had a couple of established names that weren't under contract, DDP, Booker T. You could even go into the ECW guys where you already had the Dudleys. You had Rhino, who was the last ECW champion. You're bringing in an RVD. You're bringing in a Tommy Dreamer. So to a degree, I do understand why they didn't wait, because also there is really no waiting in wrestling. Once they think they have something, you know they're going to go with it. I get what you're saying, but I also understand the reasoning behind it.
Okay, and so I appreciate that. I really do. But I'm going to counter your argument with another argument. So you have all these stars that are coming in. Well, talents anyways. Not all of them were stars. But do you remember during the invasion angle when suddenly you had all the ECW stars turn and join the alliance, and it was WCW and ECW, and all of the ECW stars, the majority of them were already established stars in the WWE roster? Do you remember that?
Yes, I believe the established ones were the Dudleys, Taz, Raven. I think Justin Credible was there at the point. I think the only ones that were newer at the time were Mike Awesome, Lance Storm, RVD, and Tommy Dreamer, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a fake out, because what happened was they all came out to help the WWF, and then they suddenly turned and joined the alliance, and now you had ECW and WCW, right? So I feel like, why couldn't we have done that with the WCW stars? The younger guys, the Sean Stasiaks and whomever you want to talk about that are the Lance Storms, everybody else. So you have these guys come onto the roster, start establishing themselves onto the WWE audience. People start understanding who they are and becoming familiar with them. And then from there, once they've sort of ingratiated themselves to the WWE audience and the roster, and they become part of the roster, you move towards the time that you actually want to do the invasion. And then you could do something of the same thing. You have WCW mainstay stars come in and invade. And then you have some of these guys who had been from WCW come in to look like they're going to help the WWF. And then they turn, and suddenly all the guys that you've had from WCW for the last, 6 or 9 months or a year or so that have now become kind of just, WWF roster members, turning and then reforming the WCW roster. And that's how you go with it. That's how I would have done it.
I get it. But at the same time, with the ECW one that they did, would you have brought in an RVD? Would you have brought in a Tommy Dreamer and just had them become Team WWF? Also, I like the fact that you brought up Sean Stasiak, because if there's anybody that went to WCW and came back to the WWE from Invasion, somehow it was only Meat. Nobody else but Meat came back. And I that was the one big head scratcher to me.
I do agree with you. I think that he had so much upside that they wanted to give him another chance. But in terms of the ECW guys, I think you could have just brought them in. They could have been just WWF roster talents. I don't know that you necessarily needed to mix them in with the war. I mean, definitely down the road you could maybe do that and have some defections and what have you. But I definitely feel as though having the stars that they picked up, I mean, even someone like a Booker T and a DDP, you could have them come in, do some vignettes, explain to the audience who they are, remind the audience who they are, have them come in and be players, be main event players against WWF stars. And then once you get the Halls, the Nashes, the Hogans, the Flairs, even a Bischoff, all these people, you put them together and then you join them all up and you make this super roster, the super threat against the WWF. Can you imagine WrestleMania 18 if it was WCW versus WWF? I mean, 18 was a good WrestleMania, but with that dynamic, that would have been awesome.
No, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, you got to look that when they signed Flair, he at that time wasn't planning on wrestling again. No one could have guessed that they would have gotten another 6 years out of him. I'm sorry. To me, he was an older man. You never knew at that time. Hogan, kind of same thing. Nash, injury prone. You never know what he's going to do. Scott Hall had his personal demons. You never knew what he was going to do. So I think that they took the safe bet with who they got and just went for it. Did we still get a huge pop for the NWO at No Way Out? You're goddamn right we did. Did Goldberg get a big pop? Yes. Rey Mysterio? Of course. None of that. Ric Flair? Oh my God, they were in fucking North Carolina when that happened. Or was it South Carolina? They were in the Carolinas when that happened.
They were in Charlotte.
He's going to get a huge goddamn pop. I'm not going to keep arguing this because I see where your point is, and I hope you see where mine is. I just like the fact that we could actually have a spirited debate about this for once without getting hot at each other.
Yeah, no, it's fun to talk about. You see it your way and I see it I think I see merits in your argument. Obviously they did it the way they did it. I've always wondered that, especially, hindsight's always 2020. I get that. But again,
one thing that I was hoping that would have made more sense is like, clearly they thought the Alliance needed more star power, adding Steve Austin, eventually adding Kurt Angle, even adding kind of mid-card guys like Christian and Test. Why not, instead of that, why didn't they add a Chris Jericho, who has a story with WCW? I get Benoit was injured at the time. You couldn't do that. I think it was Eddie Guerrero. Was he injured at the time? Is that why he wasn't in it, really? Or is that what was going on?
I think he was let go at that point. He had some problems with the wellness policy, and he didn't come back until I believe it was April of 2002.
Right, and obviously you don't have Triple H at the time. He was out, so they were dealing with injuries of their own guys as well, and releases and all that. So to me, they did the best they could with what they had. Could they have waited? Of course. Everybody can wait for anything. Should they have? That's always going to be debatable.
Yep, and that's fair. I will give you that. I think they did do the best with what they had, but my argument will always be, had they waited, it would have been probably the biggest and most famous angle in the history of wrestling. So,
well, let's talk about the best that they had for a second there, and let's just briefly talk about the original card. We're not going to run it down, but I think that there are two matches that stand out on that, and that's RVD and Jeff Hardy and Billy Kidman and X-Pac. I thought they were the best ones. There was that weird throwaway tag. The main event was good until you had the turn. That ruined it for me. But to me, that's the only thing about the Invasion pay-per-view that I thought was worth watching.
Yeah, you know what? I like the RVD Jeff Hardy match is outstanding. It really is good. I do agree with you. I thought that the tag team match was called the inaugural brawl, I believe. And it was, I thought it was really good.
Sorry, when you said tag team match, I thought you meant like Edge and Christian versus Storm and Awesome, but you mean the main event. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was really good. I thought that the energy level was up for it. I think no matter what, I mean, I bought the pay-per-view and I was so excited for it. You have to remember that this pay-per-view, I think it got something like 800,000 buys. It was such a huge deal at the time. I was super invested in it. But to your point, I mean, about star power, if you look at the majority of the guys that were in the alliance at the time, I mean, how does that measure up with who the WWF was having as their team? So you kind of had to combine the ECW and WCW rosters. Plus, you had to have that defection. I don't know if it needed to be Austin necessarily, but you had to even the sides up a little bit there. There was a big glaring discrepancy, I think.
Oh, I agree with the defection. I just think somebody like a Chris Jericho would have made more sense, where he had so much history in WCW. Then he became such a big name. Or even the Big Show. For God's sakes, the man won the WCW championship on his first night, his first match. Those two would have made more sense to me. Instead of at Invasion, you had Big Show in a throwaway 6-man. It made no sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. Now, I think there is an argument to be made there that certain WCW talents, former WCW talents, had been so vocal about how much they hated being in WCW that it wouldn't have made a lot of sense to have them then go back. But to have someone like Big Show, who was such a big part of the Monday Night Wars, going from WCW to the WWF, that was a huge deal. I feel like he definitely should have had more prominence on the card. And thus, he was in the final match at Survivor Series. But having him there in the beginning, instead of teaming with, who was it? I think it was Albert and Billy Gunn going up against Hugh Morris and then maybe the Natural Born Thrillers or something.
Yeah, it was Hugh Morris, Canyon, and Meat.
Yeah. So, like you still call him Meat. Yeah, I don't really understand that one either. It was a head scratcher. Then you had the referee versus referee match. And it was... I think at the time, everybody was so excited about the prospect and we didn't know what was coming next that everybody was kind of fine with it for what it was at the time. But yeah, in hindsight, just a very poorly booked card in general.
All right. Well, should we finally hop into our 7-match each rebooking? Not rebooking, but I guess to a degree, fantasy booking of the Invasion angle. Are you ready? Do you want to kick it off, or do you want me to kick it off?
Why don't you kick it off? Because I have a feeling our lists are going to be very different.
All right. Well, I'm going to kick it off with a match. Okay, so I'm not going to lie. Originally, I had Eddie Guerrero versus Chavo Guerrero on here, but we know that's not happening now because apparently Eddie was released. So if we are playing so question here, Jay. Are we playing along with injuries? Like if people were injured, I guess it doesn't matter because we're doing a 24-month. Oh, we should say that. So we're not doing it based off of just when the first came in. Jay and I made this list based off of the first 24 months. So 2 years from when the invasion kind of started. That's the way we're going, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So just because you have certain talents, we're not doing this based on, we're rebooking the Invasion pay-per-view. We're doing this based on more or less all the top stars from WCW, the Goldbergs, the Nashes, the Halls, the Hogans, all these different stars. We're doing it up to and around the time that Goldberg came in, because he was really the last of them to come in. He had just signed a new deal with AOL Time Warner, I think, right before the company went under. So that's the idea, is we're going to do it in that time frame so that you get to see the matches that you want to see with all the top stars. But with that being said, there will be injuries and releases and all that kind of thing. And we're also not including anybody that wasn't actually signed. So there's not going to be a Sting. There's not going to be a Lex Luger. There's not going to be a Jeff Jarrett. All these guys were never signed by the WWE again, or if they were, it was much later on. So that doesn't kind of fit into the equation today.
I mean, I don't think there would have been a Lex Luger on this list anyway, personally, but I'm going to kick it off then with Kurt Angle going one-on-one with Mike Awesome.
Okay, that sounds pretty good. I like the sound of that.
So Mike Awesome was always a powerhouse. He was booked really, really strongly in ECW. Multiple time champion. Didn't leave on the best of terms. Went to WCW. Kind of got screwed over there with that 70s guy gimmick. Like it was the story of WCW, ECW. You went from ECW to WCW, unless your name was Raven, chances are you weren't getting a big pop. I know you could make the argument for Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio, but when you think ECW, those guys don't really pop into your mind. Mike Awesome versus Kurt Angle, I think would be a snug, well-worked match, and I think they actually could have had a fantastic feud that would have lasted a couple of months. Like, you could have put Mike Awesome in the inaugural brawl, take out I mean, I don't even know who you take out, so I'm not going to play that game right now. But you could have had him and Angle go into a huge feud that could have gone into SummerSlam. I think that would have been a lot better instead of still having Kurt Angle versus Steve Austin, because the alliance broke off and had Steve Austin with them and Kurt Angle was his challenger. I didn't like that. Give me Kurt Angle versus Mike Awesome any day, every day.
Yeah, I'm not mad at it. I think it's actually a good choice. I think the styles would mesh quite well. And I think, again, going back to what we said previously, having, utilizing and capitalizing on some of those younger talents that were coming over from WCW, I think it makes sense to pair him with an Angle. I mean, Angle hadn't been around that long either at that point, but was, the more established of the stars. So I really like the idea of that match. And I think that as well, the two styles would really mesh into maybe doing like a gimmick match blow off. I could see them maybe doing some kind of a hardcore type match. I mean, that match that Kurt Angle had with Shane McMahon at King of the Ring 2001 was absolutely mind-bogglingly spectacular. It was a phenomenal match.
Oh, I would not change that at all, ever. If we ever rebook that card, that match stays 100%.
100%. It's Shane McMahon's best match ever. And probably one of Angle's best matches ever, actually. So, for those of you that don't think that Shane can work, he's not half bad. Go back and watch that match. But I could see, after having seen that kind of rough edge to Angle, I could definitely see Mike Awesome and Kurt Angle having some sort of a kind of a really brutalizing type blow off to their feud.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm glad that you agree with that. And now I'm very interested to hear what your first one is.
Well, my first is going to be quite different from yours. I think it's a match that definitely has been brewing for years and years and years. And I think we never did get a chance to see it in its proper context, its proper platform. So my first match is Vincent Kennedy McMahon versus Eric Bischoff.
Okay. It's really interesting that you have this on your list, because I have something similar, which we will get into later, but I fucking love this. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, like, how do you not have this? How has this not happened? It doesn't make sense to me. Instead, you had Bischoff versus Austin in a squash, but you never had Bischoff versus McMahon. God damn, I love you for this.
Well, to me, I mean, building this up, I really think that the Hogan McMahon match at WrestleMania 19 was actually really good. Obviously both men were past their prime. Well, Vince really never had a prime in the ring, but Hogan was past his prime. But they did a really, really good job. But I could see them building this match for WrestleMania 19. I could definitely see Bischoff versus McMahon. That would be a big draw for people. I definitely see the potential for it to be a really solid match. Obviously, we all know that Vince is going to go over. I mean, unless they're building a program or they're going to do it a few times. But, it would not be a beautiful, to steal a phrase, 5-star match. It wouldn't be a classic. I think it would just be a good old-fashioned, damn good fight with some stiff shots, maybe a couple potatoes in there. But you're going to get some color. You're going to get some use of some of the extracurriculars outside the ring, a la chairs and tables and what have you. But I definitely think that for the amount of bad blood there was between these two men throughout the height of the Monday Night Wars, this match needed to happen, and needed to happen on a big time stage, not on a random Monday Night Raw.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it kind of gets me I might as well just lead into what my next one was going to be because it's kind of similar. I had
Sounds good.
Vincent Kennedy McMahon versus Eric Bischoff versus Paul E. Dangerously in a triple threat.
Okay, I can see that.
But here's
Yeah,
here's the difference though. I had essentially Bischoff and Heyman, who both hate each other, or did, they may not now, double teaming Vince throughout the whole thing. And then then Heyman low blows Bischoff. Like, I know we're not breaking down matches here, but I had Paul Heyman winning. I had like the cowardly loudmouth who was going to brag about this forever going over because I thought that was smart booking.
yeah, I could kind of see it being a thing of a sort of like a war of attrition between Vince and Eric. And then you have, maybe have this final like death blow to each guy. Like maybe they do like simultaneous, this is back in 2002, 2003, folks. So don't, lambaste me for this, but maybe a couple of unprotected chair shots to the head, something like that. And then both guys are like the final knockout blow for each guy. And then, wormy Paul Heyman's, slithers into the ring and catches the pin on one of them. I think I could definitely see it going down that way.
Well, it's weird that we finally have something in common on this show and that's what it is. So I want you to give me the next one because I'm ready to shit on something.
Okay. The next match I have on my card is Rey Mysterio going up against Shawn Michaels.
You're a motherfucker because I have that one on mine too. So now I'm going to switch it to something else.
Mm-hmm. No, I know the match did happen. I believe it happened at the Monday Night Raw.
It happened once on the Eddie Guerrero tribute show.
I was just going to say, yeah. So I think it did happen. I remember it being a quite good match. But that's a match I definitely could have seen, again, at a WrestleMania. You could build up that program. Maybe at a, 2005, 2006 type era, maybe would have been really good. I think that both guys, there's an argument to be made that Shawn Michaels was better in his second run than his first. I think for me, it's 100%. I think that Shawn, as good as he was before his back injury, really put everything together in terms of being the complete performer that he is when he came back in 2002. So to be able to utilize all those requisite skills to go up against a Rey Mysterio, who had come into his own through WCW and now was making himself a name in WWE at the time, I definitely feel as though that would have been a match that would have been talked about and raved about as, one of the classic matches and feuds of all time.
Yeah, I couldn't have put that better. So I'm going to quickly add something else to my list. I have a huge list in front of me that I narrowed down to 7, so it won't be hard. But the next one that I'm going to say is probably a lot of people's dream matches, and that is Stone Cold Steve Austin going one-on-one with Hulk Hogan.
I, too, have this on my list, but in a different position. So walk me through it, pal.
So, yeah, you can say in a different position. To me, I'm not going in order necessarily. I'm just saying that these are matches I would have wanted to see. So I think that Rock Hogan was perfect. You really can't deny that it was great. The NWO running him over with a truck or smashing into the ambulance, maybe that was a little much, but think about what it would have been like if, say, Hogan had gone over Rock. I get what they were doing there. It was the passing of the torch. But Rock really only had another year left, max, of his full-time wrestling career. Think about what would have happened if Hogan beat Rock. NWO stayed together. We didn't have the betrayal against Hogan after a year already. I get why they did it. The crowd pop. They turned him babyface. But if you had brought Austin into that the next night on Raw, after Austin had beat Scott Hall, and then he challenges Hogan, say we build a SummerSlam, Austin doesn't do the whole walking out thing, I think that would have been huge because it would have made the NWO pseudo heel still because Austin's not going to get booed. Rock got booed because Rock isn't Austin. I hate to say that, but Rock is not Austin. Austin would have gotten nothing but cheers. Hogan still would have gotten the cheers, but you could have kept the NWO strong. go down into, say, King of the Ring, have Austin beat Nash, and then you build to him and Hogan at SummerSlam.
Yeah, I'll touch on this match now since we're talking about it. I think there's an argument to be made that this is maybe one of the top 2 or 3 matches that should have happened but never did. This match, to me, would have been maybe one of the biggest main events in the history of wrestling. I know that they were talking about doing it back in even maybe 2006, 2007. They had had some conversations and trying to put the pieces together. I don't know how they would have booked the match. I really don't know at that point. I understand that Hogan and Austin are quite friendly now. I don't know how they were back then. I think there was some contention there. But in terms of this match as a sort of slipping through your fingers, lost opportunity. I mean, people always point to Hogan and Flair at WrestleMania 8. Why didn't it happen? It ended up happening in WCW. Fine. It didn't happen. A lot of people point to that as being one of the biggest missteps in WWF history, that it didn't happen.
But
to me,
but at least
that
match. But at least that match did happen at some point.
Yes, it did. But to me, there's a couple of others that I would put in the conversation. But to me, this is maybe the number one match that should have happened and never did. I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah, like you could throw a Sting and Taker in there too as like the ultimate dream match that never happened. But again, due to our rules, that's not happening on this.
Yeah, but I mean, for me personally, and you know how big of an Undertaker fan I am, I have never been that interested in a Sting Undertaker match. I think it's a lot of, again, hype. I understand, the gimmicks are a little similar and this and that, but that match to me was never something I was dying to see. Would it be cool to see it? Sure. But it wasn't on my, Mount Rushmore of matches that I've always wanted to see. I think it'd be neat to see it, but definitely wasn't something that I was, salivating over.
No, that's totally fair. Now, my question for you is, are you keeping Austin Hogan in your list, or are you pulling it out because I already said it, or did that just cover your next one already?
No, I think it's okay. I think that we're sort of informal in terms of our list. We're not going to, I guess, rank them because you're not. I will say that this was my number one. This is the match that I think should have happened and didn't, for a variety of reasons. It's arguable that these two guys are the biggest stars in the history of wrestling ever. So for these two to have, be in the same company at the same time and for the match to never take place, to me is just, I don't know. It's a head scratcher.
Oh, no, I get that completely. So do you want me to go to my next and we just covered yours, or do you have something else to throw in there?
I think that we both had it on our list, so you can just go to your next.
So my next one is definitely not going to be on your list, and it probably won't be on anyone else's list ever. But I have a tag team match here, and it is the APA going up against Chronic.
Really? Why?
Okay, so hear me out. They're both really, really big, rough teams. Like, you look at Bryan Adams and Brian Clark. Could they work? Yeah, they could work. Not the greatest. But I feel like they would have respected the APA, unlike a Public Enemy type thing. Like, they would have been down to work. APA were kind of the unsung heroes of the Invasion. They were the one team. They weren't in the main event, but they were leading the locker room. Anytime a whole giant brawl would come out, they would be the ones leading it. I think they are the forgotten heroes of this era. And why not put them against Chronic? You don't have really any other tag teams that came in. I think this would have been a hard-hitting, not a long feud, but at least a good match. I know I'm probably in the minority here. I always loved Bryan Adams. I thought Crush was great. I thought Adam Bomb was very, very dumb as a gimmick, but it got over to a degree in that era. You put them together. He goes to WCW. Brian Clark goes to WCW. He does the whole Wrath and Mortis gimmick with Canyon. Then he's kind of just there, not doing anything. Chronic revitalized his career. They had a good, strong run in WCW. They were pushing them to the goddamn moon. Could I have said put Harlem Heat in this role? You're goddamn right I could, but we didn't get Stevie Ray. I don't even know how much he wrestled after this, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that this would have been fantastic, given the tag teams that were coming in. You can't have the Steiners. You can't have Harlem Heat. So why not? Chronic was their biggest tag team at the end of their run.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's your list. I don't agree with it. I personally, I think Brian Adams and Brian Clark on their own as singles were not terrible workers. I think Brian Adams was the better of the two. I think that the two of them together as a tag team were atrocious. Just a lot of, botched spots and big man moves. And I just didn't think that they were a very good in-ring tag team. I think, again, like Crush on his own, I'll take Crush. I think Crush is a solid worker. Even, Brian Clark wasn't half bad. I don't know if this would have made my top list. I understand why you put it on there because I'm sure you wanted to get a tag team match on the card, as well as you wanted to, utilize some of these stars that were there at the end of WCW. But for me, Chronic is nowhere near my list.
And that's totally fair. Why don't you give me your next one then?
Well, you're probably going to hate mine just as much as I didn't agree with yours. So my next dream match on my card is Goldberg against The Undertaker.
No, yeah, I'm not going to like this one. I know we saw it, but boy, did we see it past both men's primes. And you don't hate it like everybody else does. But yeah, okay, so are we going Dead Man Undertaker or American Badass Undertaker?
I would want Dead Man Taker. So I guess if we're extending the rules a little bit here, maybe it would be a feud that he would do. Well, I guess I don't know. Maybe it would be the match maybe that would be the Goldberg's last match at WrestleMania 20. Be putting over Undertaker in his return to the Dead Man gimmick. That might be fun. I feel like that match would have been a really, really solid match back in this time frame in terms of, both guys. The Undertaker was the backbone of the WWF for the better part of 30 years. So if you have him there, as such an established star, and then you have Goldberg come in, who, has this, well, he had incredible momentum coming back to the WWE based on the reputation he had made for himself in WCW. I think by the time WCW closed, Goldberg's Jets had been super cooled, but giving the 2 years off and then returning, people were really interested to see him again. So having Goldberg versus Taker in this era, I think would have been, a real big dream match. And I think they would have been able to sell it as such.
I mean, you're not wrong in that aspect. 100% this would have had eyes on it and people would have been all about it. But I look at Goldberg's run in 2003. I didn't think it was that great. It was mainly just Triple H either Goldberg putting over Triple H or Triple H putting over Goldberg. That's pretty much what that run was.
Yeah, but I think we can all agree that we would have booked it differently. I mean,
I'm not going to lie, Jay. I think I have 3 more to go, I believe, and I'm not. Spoiler alert: Hunter's not on any of them.
Not for me either. Oh, actually, no, that's not true. There is one, but no, I just think we can all agree that Goldberg should have been booked differently. It's the same thing with Steiner. Steiner could have been a big player in the WWF or WWE had he been booked differently, especially coming off of that debut he had at Survivor Series 2002. So I think we can all agree that there is a little bit of a bias there. When you bring in stars from another company, they're never going to be given the same kind of shine and rub that their homegrown talents have been given.
No, that's totally fair. And I actually, my next match does include The Undertaker. I have The Undertaker and Scott Hall going at it.
Really? That's interesting. So would it be NWO Scott Hall? Would it be?
No. It would be NWO Scott Hall. It would be American Badass Undertaker. That way you're literally just getting a brawl. There's no gimmick where like Scott Hall does the whole thing where maybe he gives him the fall away slam and thinks it's over and Undertaker sits up. It's an actual fight. It's 2 hard, strong workers, can do anything. They're both big men, but they're both big men that can work. I think that this would be great. I'm not going to lie. I toyed between this and Undertaker versus Rhino. And I think that this is the better one with Undertaker and Scott Hall.
It's funny you say that because I think I would have preferred Undertaker Rhino myself. But I mean, I can see it. I don't know for me if this is something that would be a dream match. I know that the Undertaker, wrestled Razor Ramon. They wrestled a few times back in the early to mid 90s, but obviously different gimmicks. It's really interesting sometimes when you look at wrestlers, how a different gimmick can change your perception of the character. So no, I don't hate it. I don't know if it would be that, significant in terms of my, it's sort of like the Undertaker Sting thing for me. I mean, it would be cool to see it, but I don't know if I'd be going out of my way to be, saying my prayers, eating my vitamins and begging for a Hall and Undertaker match, but I don't hate it. No, it's fine.
Cool. I mean, what do you got next for me then, man? Let's see. I'm curious. You said you have Triple H on your list, and I just got to ask, are we seeing Triple H and Ric Flair? Is that what we're seeing?
No, actually, my next match and feud that I have on here is The Rock versus Ric Flair. So I feel like just for the promos alone, you'd have to do it as a heel Flair. I can totally see, Flair coming in 2002, having had his issues with confidence and things of that nature in WCW. Imagine a revitalized, re-energized Ric Flair, which we did see in 2002. As he started going along, he had some really solid pay-per-view matches in the summer of 2002. He wrestled Eddie Guerrero. He wrestled Chris Jericho. He wrestled RVD. So I can just imagine a heel Ric Flair, rejuvenated, going up against one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. The Rock versus Flair, I think, would have been outstanding. We did see the match once on Raw, but both guys were faces at the time. So give me heel Flair and a face Rock. I'm all for it.
So are you to a degree replacing Rock Hogan at all at Mania 18, or is this on top of that?
This is on top of that. I would have this maybe through the summer of 2002, because I think we talked about this before, that I always sort of thought, based on how we booked WrestleMania 18, or rather how I booked it, I had Austin winning the title, and then I had Lesnar winning the King of the Ring, and then going into SummerSlam 2002, I would have Austin versus Lesnar, and then maybe you could do this match here, Rock versus Flair. You could do that on the undercard.
I'm not opposed to it at all. I like it. I definitely would have been more on heel Flair side than face Rock. I was never a big Rock fan growing up. I've grown to appreciate him as I got older, but as a teenager, I just fucking hated him. And I know I don't even think I'm in the minority there. I think Rock had a polarizing career.
Yep, I'm with you. I was never the biggest Rock fan. I'm the same sort of boat. I think I've come to appreciate him much more as I've gotten older. And obviously, by all accounts, he's an outstanding human being. He does a lot of nice things and wonderful things for people. But as far as, I was such a big Austin guy at that time too, that, this debate for me about who was more popular, Rock or Austin, to me, obviously The Rock is the bigger star worldwide in terms of Hollywood, but I don't think that he ever really came close to Austin's popularity, and I don't think he ever will in terms of wrestling.
So I'm not going to lie, I just lied to you earlier, and Papa Hunter does make an appearance on my list here.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a triple threat match up next.
Okay.
I have Triple H versus Rob Van Dam versus DDP.
That is a weird match.
So originally I just had Triple H and DDP, and I thought that would be fine, but I'm not going to lie. Rob Van Dam, I didn't have him really in anything, and he needed to be, so I just kind of threw him in there. We saw the Triple H Rob Van Dam feud. It went over quite well, other than the fact that Triple H kind of buried him. But the matches were strong. You had the triple threat that Rob Van Dam was involved in for the title around this time with Austin and Angle. And yes, they're both great workers, but as much as I don't like Triple H a lot of the time, he is a good worker. DDP is a good worker. He could have carried it. I think this would have been a bit of a styles clash, but those sometimes are the best things. Like, yes, they say oil and water don't mix. Every now and then you get a little bit of oil and water, and what happens, Jay? Fire.
Well, okay. I'm going to go freshen my drink here, but I just need for you to explain to me exactly why DDP is in this match. I'm all for Triple H and RVD, but I don't get DDP being in this.
So you got to keep it like this. So in my mind, yes, DDP came in as one of the strongest people from the WCW buyout, part of the alliance. They did that. We've talked about it a couple of times already on this show. They did that stupid stalker gimmick. You keep him strong, though. You have Undertaker destroy him. That's fine. It's still not going to hurt Paige. You put Paige up against somebody else, maybe even in the mid card. You have him beat an Edge, because Edge was an upper middle card guy at the time. You have him beat an Edge. You have him beat oh my God, Jeff Hardy. You go through all these mid to upper card guys, and then you have him all of a sudden going against RVD, because RVD was in the alliance, but to a degree, he was almost bigger than it at one point. It's arguable that he was more over than Alliance Austin. I know you're going to yell at me for that, but Alliance Austin was a different Austin than he was a couple of years prior, or even a couple of years after. So you have them go into a feud. Triple H comes back. Royal Rumble. DDP is still being kept strong. You go into the Rumble. The last person that Triple H eliminates could have been DDP. Then you have DDP and RVD fighting over each other. Triple H is bitching about DDP is bitching about the fact that he should be a number one contender. I don't know. We go from there. I didn't really think about how we get to the match. I'm just kind of spitballing off the top of my half-buzzed head right now. I think that this would be a good triple threat. You have the Diamond Cutter, the Pedigree, and a High Flyer. You can never go wrong with adding a High Flyer to a brawler technical type style. And if you had kept DDP strong throughout this whole thing, I truly think that his career would have lasted a couple more years, and he would have been a main event player.
I agree 100%. I agree 100% with that. I will say that one of the matches on my list that I was playing around with was DDP versus Rock. A lot of people have talked about People's Champion versus People's Champion. How do you think that would have gone?
I don't know if that would have gone over as well as Hunter, just because Rock and Hunter work very differently. Rock and Booker T made sense, especially because they both used the same finishing move. But I think that a DDP Triple H feud would have gone over better than a DDP Rock feud. You've already had Rock we've already had Rock and Hogan. You just kind of booked Rock and Flair. Rock would go on with Lesnar down the road. I think that Rock and DDP, unless you have DDP going over, I don't like that at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that some of these WWF guys that were there at the time really should have been doing jobs to some of the WCW stars just to get them established. I mean, the more established you make these stars to the WWF audience, the more interested people are going to be to see it. So I think that, if they're all going to be making money down the line, why not do a job to DDP? Why not do a job to Scott Steiner? Whomever you're going to have these guys get some wins and get some credibility with the WWF audience that maybe, again, I agree with you that during the height of the Monday Night Wars, everybody knew who the top players of WCW were. Everybody knew who the top players of WWF were. But sometimes I think that there's a bit of a disconnect. If you're a diehard WWF fan, you're not going to feel the same way about a Goldberg, a Nash, a Hall, a Hogan, all these kinds of guys. You're not going to feel the same way about those guys as you would if you're a diehard WCW fan. So if you're able to, have somebody like DDP get a win over Triple H, or you're able to have an RVD go up and get a win over The Rock or what have you. You have these different dynamics. And so that makes it much more palatable for the audience when you see that there is some jeopardy to be had going up against these stars that have just come into the company.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I believe we're both down to one match each at this point. So
I
I have a
two
few
left.
honorable. Pardon me.
I have two left.
Okay, you have two left. Do I only have one? I think I only have one. Yeah, counting I have one left. So why don't you go through your number two while I retop my drink, and then we will go over a couple of honorable mentions before we get to our number one each.
Okay, well, as alluded to earlier, my number one was Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan. So I will use a different match to reveal for our number one slot. I'm still steadfast in my thinking that that is the match that should have happened. It was the match. I will say the other match that I have on my card is a tag team match. It's one that people have been clamoring for years and years and years. And we did see some form of it at WrestleMania Play Button, which to me is the Outsiders versus the original DX, Shawn Michaels and Triple H. I feel like that's a match that people have always wanted to see. It's a match, the NWO versus DX. It's that stable war. It's the two stalwart stables from the Attitude Era and from the Monday Night Wars era. I feel like that match probably should have happened at some point. You did have all the players in place to do it for a very brief window, mind you. But I don't know. I just feel as though the DX NWO thing had so much gas behind it, so much anticipation behind it. For me personally, I was never a big DX fan, so I didn't really have that much invested in seeing that match. I was much more an NWO fan. DX to me never really resonated with me, even as a teenager. I just thought it was kind of crass and I didn't find it necessarily funny. I thought it was very juvenile in terms of the humor. For me personally, I didn't find it particularly funny or entertaining. Whereas other acts like Austin and Undertaker, I found extremely entertaining. So just from a personal perspective, it's not a match that I would have been going out of my way to see. But again, in terms of history, I think that having that match take place would have been a historical moment and in a dream match for a lot of people.
I'm not going to lie. This didn't even cross my mind. I get why you went there, but my God, yeah, no, this wasn't even anywhere near my list. I appreciate that you brought that up. I kind of feel the same as you, where I was never the biggest DX fan. I was always NWO, but it should have happened. You're right. Even if it wasn't Triple H and Shawn, which is who it should have been, even if it was the Outlaws versus the Outsiders at some point, I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if you don't do Shawn and Triple H, then the Outlaws would have been the other choice, I think. You could have done a tag team feud there, but I definitely feel as though, it's layer upon layer upon layer. So it's not just NWO, it's not just DX, it's also the Click. There's so many things that you could do to sort of build that match and create a scenario where there's a lot of believability. These guys were all best friends, and then you have some bad blood. You can tell the story about how, Hall and Nash went down south and tried to put the WWF out of business and, by extension, trying to, put both Hunter and Shawn out of business, bankrupt them, what have you. There can be some bad blood and sour grapes in that regard. So I definitely feel like, again, this is not a match for me personally that I necessarily wanted to see, but yeah, probably should have happened at some point.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do now is go over my honorable mentions before I get to my number one. Or I'll do mine, you do yours, then I'll get to my number one. Sound good?
I'll just go with your honorable mentions. I don't really have any, so okay. I will just go through yours and we'll talk.
First up, I have RVD versus Jerry Lynn, because Jerry Lynn was signed to the WWF at this point. I think they dropped the ball by not having anything with these two.
Did they not have a feud in ECW?
Oh, no, they did. But I think on a WWF grand scale, think of that on Monday Night Raw, even with fucking 10 times the amount of people watching it.
I don't disagree, but I also don't think that in WWF at the time it would have ever been given the importance that it was given in ECW.
Fair. My next one is the Dudley Boys versus Chronic.
Yeah. Well, we've already talked about Chronic, so.
I then had an earlier incarnation of Brock Lesnar and Goldberg. Not the WrestleMania 20, not what we've seen in the last 5 years, but 2002, 2003, not their final matches each. That could have been money.
Yeah, the only question is who goes over in that. I mean, if you're doing it with Goldberg just having come in, then are you going to have him do the job to the young Lesnar, and then having Lesnar having just started be the next big thing? That'd be a tough one to book, I think, at that point. And the other thing about that is,
I think it would have made more sense to have Goldberg be the first one to beat Lesnar than the Big Show.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'll give you that. Especially, it's not necessarily the Big Show; it's the way the Big Show had been booked. If you had Big Show booked strong, then 100% Big Show. But and I don't think that you'd ever get a better Lesnar and Goldberg match than we got at WrestleMania 33. It was like 7 minutes or 9 minutes long. It was the perfect way to book those two.
Yes, it was the perfect way to book those two of that era. I think it could have been done a little differently 10 years prior.
Yeah, probably so.
Next one I have here is Big Papa Pump, Scott Steiner, and Chris Jericho.
Yeah, I could see it.
I mean, Jericho's going to bump around for him. You keep Steiner looking like the jacked up muscle freak that he is. Does some power moves. He could still move at this point. Like, not as great as he could have 10 years prior. But if you're going to put him against anybody, Jericho is the one to make him look like a star.
I agree. And I honestly, I said this to you a couple of weeks ago, or maybe I said it to Tyler actually when you had a little time off there, that I really truly feel that Scott Steiner in 2001 was as over as he'd ever been. He was really finding his character. And had WCW not gone under or been sold to Vince, I really feel like we'd be talking about Scott Steiner in a different breath today. I think he'd be talked about as one of the more over and established stars of the last 20 years. I really feel like Scott Steiner was on this trajectory to be a big time player when WCW went under.
As long as we're still talking about Steiner math, I have no problem with that.
100%.
So the next one I have is Edge versus Canyon.
Okay. Yeah.
Just two good mid-card workers doing it up. I think that would have been great. Like, you could have done Intercontinental versus United States, winner take all. I would have been down with that.
Yeah, it would have been a solid match for sure. But more of a TV match in my mind. But yeah, I could see it.
Undertaker versus Rhino, which we kind of touched on earlier. And then Mike Awesome versus Kane.
Yeah, that's a sort of the quintessential big man match, but both guys could really pour on.
They can still work. Like, yeah, they could move quickly. It wouldn't have been like a big man match in the sense of, say, Great Khali versus Big Show. It's a big man match in the sense of, holy fuck, they just pulled that off, and they're both 300 pounds.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're spot on about that. I mean, that top rope clothesline of Kane's alone, right?
Then I have, surprisingly, this made my honorable mention and not my number one, Triple H and Ric Flair.
Yeah, that would have been. I mean, we saw it a few times, but that would have been something really cool as well. Triple H came back in,
but put the roles reversed and do babyface Hunter versus heel Rick.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is you just had Flair came in the day after WrestleMania, the day after Survivor Series 2001 in Charlotte. We alluded to that earlier, and then to have Triple H come in 2 months later, in January. I could definitely have seen that match being built up to something special for sure.
And the last honorable mention I have that actually did happen, and I don't hate it as much as you do, Earl Hebner versus Nick Patrick.
I don't hate it. I don't know if it should have been on a pay-per-view. That's all. I guess it
was fun for what it was, but why don't you lay down let me lay down my number one and then it's your turn, right?
Yeah, just 1 second. Before we do that, I had one other thing I wanted to bring up with you. It's not an honorable mentions thing, but I thought it'd be interesting just, to take a minute or two and just talk about some of the stars that didn't come in and talk about maybe potential dream matches just off the top of your head. We haven't talked about this ahead of time. I figured we would just quickly go about it. You can talk about your Lugers, you can talk about your Stings, you can talk about your Jarretts, whomever you can think of that didn't come in, Vampiro, what have you. Do you have any matches in mind that kind of suggest themselves right now that you would have loved to have seen maybe in the early 2000s to mid 2000s that we didn't get a chance to see?
I mean, I got to think about this for a second. I can tell you a couple of stars that I wish had come in, and maybe as I'm saying that, matches will come to mind. But Vampiro definitely is one of them. I also would have loved to have seen Conan come in. I think that seeing Conan versus even an Eddie Guerrero, like I know we've seen it before, but you know they can work really well together. And again, on the WWF stage, why the hell not? Evan Courageous is another one that I didn't get. You had Gregory Helms come in, and you had Shannon Moore. Why didn't you bring in Evan Courageous, the other member of 3 Count?
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know what the thinking was behind that. I do agree with you though. There are certain guys. I was thinking more like I get that you're thinking about more mid card or better workers and things of that nature. But I was thinking more along the lines of like, for example, I know he was a little past his prime at this point, but what do you think if we had seen a Randy Savage versus Kurt Angle match?
I'd be all about it, but I don't know about Savage in this era because he definitely seemed heavier and bulkier, and I don't know if that was steroids or if that was just him bulking up. I gotta say, the end of Randy Savage's career isn't something I think of fondly. If they had done something with him and brought him in again and rebuilt the Macho Man and he came out to the original Pomp and Circumstances, still had the tassels on his jacket and the cowboy hat, I would have been down for that.
Yeah, I don't know if at that point that would have been a direction they would have gone. I think they definitely would have repackaged him in some way. I don't think you would have seen the Savage of old. So I think it's maybe a good thing it didn't happen. But I do agree with you. There's not really one match that I can point to specifically and say, okay, well, that was kind of Savage's last match. I mean, he did have a last match, obviously, but I feel like it was such an anticlimactic way to go out of the business. So I really think he deserved better. There's other guys.
What
too.
about? Hold on. One thing I want to throw at you first is we're talking about WCW. Do you think the Invasion would have worked any better on the ECW stand if they had brought in a Sabu, a Sandman, a Steve Corino, a Mikey Whipwreck, all of these guys who we did see some of them later, but if they had come in at this era, do you think it would have helped?
Not really. I mean, I don't mean to dismiss ECW, but I think the point sort of this discussion for me is that we're talking about star power, and there was such a lack of star power in terms of the two teams, the two sides. That's hence why we had Austin go over. Yes, I think that somebody like a Sabu or a Sandman would have helped. But in terms of evening the odds for star power's sake, I don't know if they would make that big of a difference. I could be wrong. I mean, I don't want to dismiss ECW out of hand, but I don't know if they would have moved the needle that much.
Or even a Shane Douglas.
I don't know why Shane Douglas didn't come in. I mean, he was a little injury prone towards the end of his career, but his promos were outstanding. He was a good worker. I don't know the thinking behind not bringing him in. I think he would have contributed to a pretty high level, I think, for a while there.
Yeah, the only reason that I went more mid-card to a degree is when you look at WCW 2000, 2001, a lot of their main top stars were former Fed guys. I'm thinking more guys that didn't really get to that opportunity. Yeah, Conan was there for a cup of coffee playing the original Max Moon, but you never saw him there. And I think he could have either been a great mouthpiece down the line. He definitely still had lots of legs left in his wrestling career in 2001. I think he would have been a perfect example of somebody who could have come in.
Yep. No, I agree with that. And I just want to ask you one other quick thing before we get into our final match here is, so being completely objective, I know that you're marks for certain guys, and so am I, and a lot of them overlap. But just being completely objective, not taking your personal feelings of them aside, I always want to name off a couple of guys here and see if you would have brought them in or left them aside. So I'm going to start with Bam Bam Bigelow. Would you have kept him in, or would you have signed him, or would you have let him go on to other endeavors?
So Bam Bam in 2001, I probably would have not signed him. As great as he was in the 80s and 90s, by that point, I think he was done.
That's fair. I think I would have given him an opportunity. I think I would have wanted to because of his name recognition with the audience. I think I would have given him a shot to see how he does. But I agree with you. I think his better days were behind him. So what about Lex Luger? Would you have brought Lex Luger in?
No, and it's not because I don't like Luger. Luger was fine in the 80s and 90s, but again, by this time frame, I think Luger had run his course. He was doing the whole, I think he just went by the total package by the end of WCW. I wasn't a fan. He was wearing tearaways and a muscle shirt. Like, he was phoning it in 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have brought him back.
What about Miss Elizabeth?
Only if you're bringing back Randy Savage.
Okay, I'll take that. Rick Steiner.
Not on his own, but as the Steiner brothers potentially, and then have them break apart down the line, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could bring them in as a pretty formidable tag team. I would have loved to have seen a Steiner brothers versus Dudley's match.
Oh, God, yeah, that would have been incredible.
Would you have brought in Sid?
What do you think?
Well, he was a star, so you have to ask.
He was a star, but again, at this point, he couldn't even really work. His ankle was shattered.
Well, I'm thinking when he was recovered, right? Obviously not.
I don't think I would have brought him in. I think that the best thing they ever did with Sid was when they brought him back during the Raw 1000 and had him go over Heath Slater as one of the legends. He was nobody saw him coming. That was great.
That was awesome. I agree. Just a few more names here. I'm going to rattle off to you. Vampiro, I think you said you'd bring in for sure.
100% I would bring in Vampiro. If nothing else, then Vampiro versus Gangrel.
Would you have brought in Jeff Jarrett?
Okay, so hindsight being if I'm not looking at hindsight, then yes, I would have. But had we brought in Jeff Jarrett, we wouldn't have had TNA.
Yep, 100%. I think we all agree that we would have brought Sting in at some point earlier than he came in.
No, I disagree. I don't think that I would have brought Sting in.
Ever.
I think that he came in at the right time. Like, it was, I personally think that Sting should have retired after his WWE run. I know he's still in AEW. He's still able to work. The man is at least 60. I don't want to see him in the ring anymore. I think that him coming into the WWE when he did and putting over that young upstart Triple H was fantastic.
See, I agree with you if the finish was different. If you had Sting go up against Triple H and then had Sting go over, then I think, yes, that's it. But
I was being sarcastic. Yes, Sting should have won. Sting also, if he beats Triple H and then he goes on to what he did where he faced Seth Rollins for the title, and that was where he ended his career by putting over Seth Rollins, I am perfectly okay with that.
Yeah. Or then, of course, the other, side of the coin is I wonder sometimes, had Sting not gotten injured at that event, was the plan then to go on to Taker and Sting at WrestleMania 32? I bet you it might have happened, but
it probably would have at that point. Yeah, but
yeah. The other guy I had on my list here is, I know his career in ring was done at this point, and obviously a lot of bad blood, but would you have made an attempt to get Bret Hart in the company?
Absolutely, I would have. Knowing that I'm not the biggest Bret Hart fan, yes, 100% I would have, because he at least could have played, I don't want to say a mouthpiece, because Bret was good at promos, but Bret also was not great at promos, if that makes sense. He had his moments where some of them were very passionate and heartfelt, and some of them were just super cookie cutter. I think that Bret Hart coming in the Ric Flair role that he came in as the, what was the word they used? The consortium?
Yeah.
I think that could have been great for Bret. It worked out really well for Flair, but Flair still had years left in his career. So I think Bret Hart would have been really good to come back in, and just as that fuck you to Vince McMahon, we're partners. I think that would have been great.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I never thought of that. And I do agree. It's so funny because I feel like so often, especially in this episode, we've said it started off great. That seems to be like such a great or such a sort of apropos way to phrase things, because you're so right. I mean, that Flair thing started off so tremendously well with him coming out and being, partners with Vince. And then within a couple of months, it was just so stupid. But it started off really well. So much potential. So with that being
the best way to put that is it's like you and I reaching out for Big Mac grants. Is McDonald's ever going to give us one? We don't know. But we're still going to keep plugging them until they give us some free goddamn food. McDonald's, Big Mac grands, good friends, better enemies. We will be your spokespeople. We are both big men. We don't mind eating a Big Mac every now and then. And if you bring back the pizza, you're goddamn right we'll eat that too.
Oh, God. Well, okay. Well, we will certainly try. I don't know if they're going to be that thrilled with you prefacing goddamn with everything that they talk about, everything that they sell. But they'd be like, blast.
Hey, I'm loving it. And I'm sure they are too.
God damn it. I'm loving it. Okay. Well, I can't think of any other name. The only other name that popped in my head just while we were talking was Terry Funk. But I think we both agree that maybe he wasn't ready to be a full.
I think I would have brought Terry Funk in for a short run. I think if you had brought Terry Funk in, and Mick Foley did come back not that long after, it was about 2 years later, and he had some of the best matches of his career. You look at him and Edge at 22, picture him and Funk. If they were still able to work, just having one last go all out, fuck you, we're going to do whatever we want match, I think that would have been great.
Yeah, maybe. I could see it. So, I have to apologize to all the listening audience here if for some reason we omitted a person's name. There's nobody else I can really think of that suggests themselves currently to me. I guess you could talk about bringing in some other guys that were there, that necessarily weren't necessarily rather there at the end of WCW, but could have come in later on. I'm talking about someone like maybe would you bring in? Art Anderson came in as an agent, but would you bring in a Mongo McMichael? Would you bring in a Disco Inferno?
Okay, let me throw a couple of names at you that they did bring in, and you tell me if they should have, if they shouldn't have, if they dropped the ball, if you would have done something different, and let's see how that goes. This is a little different, but I think it could be fun.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm all here for it.
I'm going to start with Hugh Morris.
Yeah, I would have brought him in, but I would have repackaged him.
Buff Bagwell.
Yeah, I would have brought him in. Just for I think the same reason they brought him in was because he was an established name. I don't know the particulars of why he didn't stay long. I know that there were some issues, but I don't know. I feel like maybe he should have gotten another opportunity as well. Maybe release him and then see if he gets his shit together, then maybe bring him back. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Whoa, guys! Jay just said shit. He must be having a drink or two right now. Okay, Chuck Palumbo, Sean O'Hare, and Mark Jindrak. I'm going to throw them all in one.
Yeah, definitely. I would have signed them.
Now, would you have brought Mike Sanders in with them too, or would you have done what they did and leave him out?
I don't really know about him. I don't know why he didn't come in. There must be something there that we don't know about. But all things being equal, then yeah, why not bring him in?
Would you have brought Jazz in earlier, or do you think that having her at Survivor Series as the mystery made the most sense?
Yeah, I would have. No, I think it's good that she came in as a. Which mystery was she again? I'm sorry.
She was the mystery opponent or whatever in the 6-pack challenge for the women's championship at Survivor Series 01. So technically, day the alliance died, she debuted.
I'm sorry. I was thinking of Survivor Series 02. I was thinking what you're alluding to. That's right. My apologies. Yeah, I would have brought her in as a mystery. I think that's good. I think that's another thing we've talked about today as well, is you don't have to throw everything at the wall at once. We can sometimes space things out. So I'm good with her coming in when she did.
Shannon Moore.
Yeah, I would have brought him in.
Ultimo Dragon.
100%.
Now, do you think they dropped the ball on him, though?
Yes, I do, definitely. I think the other thing, too, because the WWE at the time, their cruiserweight division never measured up to what the WCW cruiserweight division was, especially, maybe 2 or 3 years earlier. So I think to try to have, that division versus their division, in terms of head-on matchups, you really weren't going to get that. It was almost like the opposite of the main card, where you had all these top established stars on the WWF side for the main event talents. I think the opposite was true of the WCW. You would have had much better in-ring performers and more established cruiserweights coming in than you would have had on the WWF roster at the time.
And now, with the exception of DDP, Booker T, RVD, people you are bringing in that you would have put in main event positions, give me 3 from who they brought in that you would have done.
That I would have put in main event positions other than those 3?
Yeah, if there were anybody that you could see them at least putting a rocket ship on, and it may not have worked out, maybe an experiment, but give me 3 that you would have put in the main event at some point.
Boy, that's tough.
Because I'm just going to say right now, I think the most underrated person that they brought in, dropped the bomb on, Chris Kanyon.
I would agree. I don't think that I would have put him in a main event position. I mean, he basically was at one point. I mean, he was teaming with DDP to go up against Taker and Kane at SummerSlam in a tag team matchup in a steel cage. So that's pretty high up on the card in terms of, in my opinion.
No, it's high up on the card, but the way that they treated that match was not well.
No, I agree. It's really hard to say. I mean, Lance Storm, I think, could have been a main event guy, but in a different era. I think nowadays he'd be a main event guy because of his in-ring work rate, but it's a completely different company in that way. I really can't think of 3 guys that I were ready to be main event players at that point, other than the 3 you mentioned.
I think that there is an argument to be made for Mike Awesome. I think Taz, I've always said they dropped the ball on, but I guess if we're only going with guys they just are bringing in, Mike Awesome, Chris Kanyon, and Meat.
Yeah, I don't, maybe not. I don't see that myself, but
all right. Well, I'm going to go on to my number 1 right now before we get to yours, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
So I'm not going to lie, I broke the rules a little bit here, and I have a tie for my number 1.
Okay.
I think that you're going to disagree potentially, especially for the number 1 position, because I'm not going to lie, I did save these ones for number 1. So the first one is Chris Benoit and Lance Storm.
Okay.
And the second one is William Regal and Fit Finlay.
Okay.
You know me, I've always been more inclined to more the mid-card guys. I respect them a lot more because a lot of the time they have to work harder to get their spots. Whereas once you're on a Stone Cold level, on a Triple H level, on a Goldberg level, you're there. It's not as hard to lose that spot as it is for these guys to gain the spot. We know from experience that we've seen Finlay and Regal before, but at this era, I think it would have been great. You keep Regal on the WWF side. You don't have him switch to the fucking WCW commissioner, kiss my ass, blah, blah, blah. You bring in Finlay as the heel, going after Regal. I think that would have just been a technical classic plus a brawl.
Yeah. I get these matches, and I like both matches. They wouldn't be in terms of my number 1s. I think I think you and I see the list a little differently, which is completely fine. I like this match a lot. I mean, I've always loved both Finlay and Regal, so you'll get no argument from me. Benoit, obviously, great in-ring worker, going up against, you said Kanyon, Lance
Storm.
Yeah, great match. Great match. I can definitely see it.
Picture it as this too, like Benoit was injured for what, a year and a bit? Have Lance Storm stay strong, maybe as the Intercontinental Champion, not fully up in the main event, but you have that, and then you have Benoit come back to challenge him. And the two of them, especially if they're in a pay-per-view in Canada, that would be the main event to them. It would. I don't care if you had Austin, Rock, Goldberg, Scott Steiner, Brock Lesnar, all of those guys on top. If you're in especially Alberta, that is the goddamn main event.
I don't disagree, but I'm just going to freshen my drink here real quick. What is your thinking about, like, who would go over in that match?
I'll give you both of them, actually. So in the Lance Storm, Chris Benoit one, if we are doing a Benoit return for the Intercontinental title, we're going to do it over a bit of a period. It's not going to be a one and done because these two can actually go. Lance Storm, I know you're going to agree with me on this, one of the most underrated wrestlers in the history of wrestling. Is he underrated amongst the wrestlers? No. Is he underrated amongst a lot of the fans and management? Abso-fucking-lutely. I think that it would come back where Benoit came back, challenged him maybe on a Monday Night Raw. The match would probably be thrown out. There'd be a DQ or a count out or something like that. It would build to the pay-per-view. And in my mind, I'm building it to the pay-per-view in Calgary. I don't know which one that was because the last one I can think of is when Benoit defended the heavyweight championship there. But if you have the two of them going there, 100% I had Benoit going over Lance Storm. The story's already built there. You look at Regal and Finlay. I have Finlay going over Regal only because he's the one coming in. He's the one that is a brawler. Yes, Regal's a brawler as well. He'd been doing the brass nut gimmick. He'd been the commissioner. He'd been the man's man, everybody's favorite theme song. But you bring in Finlay, whose whole gimmick is that he's Irish and he wants to fight. He is what Sheamus should be. Finlay is the ultimate Irishman in any fucking wrestling arena. Finlay is the ultimate man's man in a lot of wrestling. He is a tough man. He's going to destroy everybody. So I have Finlay going over Regal, and I have Benoit winning the feud with Lance.
Yeah, and I'm fine with both those. I think they're both great. I would love to see both matches. I think that they have taken place previously in WCW, and I'm fairly certain we saw a Benoit Lance Storm match at some point in WWE. But yeah, I'm fine with both those. I think they're both really solid, hard-hitting matches for different reasons. So I think I'm just going to go into my final pick. And again, I just want to preface that my number one would be Hogan and Austin. I think that that's the match that should have happened that never did. But since we already talked about...
Are you just going to give us some bullshit like fucking Jerry Lawler versus J.J. Dillon now?
No. I'm going to talk about another match, but I'm just want to make sure that you're aware of that. That my pick for number one, if we had been ranking, would have been Hogan and Austin. So I think the other glaring omission from the list, we've heard about it for years. It's the match that a lot of people were clamoring to see. It's a dream match for a lot of people, and that is, of course, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Goldberg.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't even cross my mind. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't even there. I don't have it on an honorable mention. I don't have it written down anywhere. This completely left my memory.
Yeah, I think it's a match that a lot of people have, been fantasizing about, and especially during the height of the Monday Night Wars, 98, especially, I think, when you're comparing the two, there was, they had some similarities in terms of their appearance, a little bit of similarity in terms of their style. But I think that there's a lot of people out there that feel that this is the match that they always wanted to see and never did. I think it would actually be a pretty solid match. I think it would have been highly entertaining. The crowd reaction and the crowd investment in the match would have been off the charts. I could see it being one of the most over matches in history. But again, if you're comparing this to Hogan Austin, it's always going to be Hogan Austin for me. I think for me personally, seeing Austin Goldberg was not something that I was, crazy about seeing. I would have loved to have seen it. Don't misunderstand me. And if it had been on pay-per-view, they would have gotten my 50 or 60 bucks easily. But for me personally, I was given the choice of the two, I would take Hogan Austin. What are your thoughts? I mean, I know you're not a big fan of Goldberg. I know that you're not even necessarily that big a fan of Steve Austin. But just in terms of star power and bankability, pay-per-view buy rates, the marquee match, this has got to be really high on the list, right?
As far as buy rates and marquee, yeah, it's up there. As far as personal wanting to see it, not in the slightest. It never was. It never will be. I'm sure there's a lot of people that will, but Jay, I can honestly say I completely disagree with this, and I hate it.
That's completely fine. I don't necessarily. The thing is, with a lot of the matches on the list, they're not necessarily matches that I would personally go out of my way to see. I mean, I'd watch them, of course. Dream matches are dream matches for a reason, but they're not necessarily my dream matches. I just think in terms of matches that they had the opportunity to do at one point or another, and they never did, is something that I definitely feel as though there was some missed opportunities. I mean, if you wanted to do Austin versus Goldberg, you could have done it at WrestleMania 19. It was possible. Goldberg came in the night after WrestleMania, so clearly he had already been signed. If you'd really wanted to try to get that match in the ring, if we're going by the theory that Austin's last match was 19, it could have been done. Now, do you want to see?
But nobody really knew that was Austin's last match going into it.
Well, nobody knew. That's true. But then the other thing there too is, if you do that match, you're not going to have Goldberg lose his first match, and you're not. Do you want to have Austin drop out to Goldberg at WrestleMania? So I don't really know how you do it, but I get what you're saying, that you have no interest in seeing it. I think I have more interest in seeing it than you do. I think that the match itself would have been better than you probably think that it would have been. I think it would have been, a decent match in a particular time frame, particular era. But I mean, again, if you're using the criteria of big time box office matches that never happened, that could have and should have, this has got to be on the list.
That's fair. I'll give you that, but it's not my cup of tea at all. I get why you put it on there. I also get why I completely forgot about it.
Yeah, fair enough. And so I think, I don't know. So in terms of your interpretation of our list today, like, what do you think, if you were to do this big time, dream match scenario, what in your mind is the main event based on the matches we've talked about today? What's the main event of the card?
Probably Hogan Austin.
Yeah, you think so too? Yeah, I agree.
It's that, or honestly, Shawn Michaels and Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, I could see the Shawn Michaels Rey Mysterio being something so outstanding to open the show with. Like, I think my favorite Rey Mysterio match ever is against Kurt Angle at SummerSlam 2002. So,
hands down, and I get what you're going for, but it could also be held up as a main event, though.
Oh, for sure it could, no doubt. At least in the the upper part of the card. The way.
And as much as I want to see like Vince, Heyman, and Bischoff in the main event, that's a semi-main event.
Yeah. You could even build to that as well, doing like Vince and Bischoff captaining Survivor Series teams or something like that. And I don't know, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but I feel like we've done a really good job covering this today. I mean, folks listening today, if there's anything that Tyrone and I missed, I mean, there's so much, to coin a phrase, meat on the bone in terms of this subject. We had a really, really hard time coming up with a way to really encapsulate our feelings about this subject. I mean, there's so many different differing opinions rather. There's so many different ways to go about booking this angle, or to go about, looking in hindsight as to what we would have done. So I think we tried our best to give you our opinions of what we think is.
I truly think there are three people that are going to give us something that we didn't do, and that's Tyler, Mike, and Jonah. I think the three of them will give us some feedback, tell us that we were wrong in a lot of things, and add something that we forgot, and we'll be like, oh, fuck, how did we miss that?
Yeah, and again, there's so much going on. There's so many moving parts to this particular angle and this time in the company that it's be very easy for us to not see the forest for the trees. So I think that we did a good job here. I think that we had a really good discussion and it really cleared the subject matter out. So I don't think there's a whole lot else left to talk about in terms of the invasion. I think we covered it. What do you think?
I think it's time to put a bow on it, and let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Next week, Jay, you're booking. I took it for the team and took a couple there because I wasn't able to make a couple, but goddamn, I have a gift for you for next week.
What's that, pal?
We're going back to WCW 2000, man. You're going to do New Blood Rising.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, hopefully that rises our viewership because I don't think too many people were interested in our previous WCW 2000 offerings. So we'll see where we go with that. I believe that was in Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right. And you got a main event of Booker T and Jeff Jarrett. You have Vampiro's on the card. You have everyone's favorite Major Guns is on the card. It is just a wild barn burner.
It's just who's that of professional wrestling? I can't wait. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that we did a good job today, pal. I'm very happy that we got this subject under our belt. We've been both, if you'll pardon the pun, grappling with the idea of how we're going to present this. So we finally got it done, and a very good job we did of it too, I feel. Next week, I will be going back in time to a year previous from the invasion, and that is WCW 2000 in August. And for myself and Tyrone, who is going to quickly brief us on our social media interactions and where they can find us.
That would be on Twitter at good_enemies, Instagram, good_enemies, Facebook, Good Friends Better Enemies Podcast. And for all things Counted Out 7 and Good Friends Better Enemies, make sure you get your asses over to countedout7.com. You can find everything about all of our shows there. The boys did an amazing job on that website. Just go check it out, okay, guys? And by the way, McDonald's, you're all around. Jay's coming for you. I'm coming for you. If we don't have some kind of a fucking deal in the next couple of weeks, I swear to God, we're going to Burger King.
Sounds good. You can get your burger's worth there. But again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to us this week. For myself, for Tyrone, for Judy Bagwell, for Forklifts, for Big Mac Grands, for the invasion angle, and for all things that should have been but weren't, you've been listening to the Good Friends Better Enemies podcast.
Bye.